Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a Boeing 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. Welcome to your winter operations training program. I'll start straight away by saying that setting this one up was really not that easy because Flight Simulator is very simplified in terms of winter operations. Now we have some lovely visual effects as we can see on the screen right now, but the actual simulation behind things is rather a bit of a problem, so it's not all that easy and we have to make some sacrifices here. Therefore, if you are a real pilot currently watching this, please take it all with a grain of salt, as a lot of the things that I'm about to say are really customized to the Microsoft Flight Simulator world and are probably not applicable like this in real life. So, with all of that established, let's quickly talk about some common misconceptions that we have. So, one of them is the difference between de-icing and anti-icing. Now that misconception is even promoted by some naming conventions inside the aircraft. But let's talk about it real quick. Anti-icing means a way to prevent icing from building up on an airplane, while de-icing means removing ice that has already accumulated. A perfect example why there is a misconception about this is the naming convention inside the aircraft. So we have engine anti-ice and wing anti-ice over here. However, the wing anti-ice is actually used as a de-icing tool, while the engine anti-ice is used as an anti-icing tool. In other words, you activate the engine anti-icing prior to entering icing conditions, but the wing anti-ice is only used after ice has already built up on your airplane to remove that ice again. Now, we'll go into more details on the second part of this series as to when exactly to use the engine and wing anti-ice, but it is important to make a clear difference between de-icing and anti-icing right at the beginning of this series. Another difference that we have to make is between icing conditions and freezing conditions. Now, if you have a Boeing 737 AFCOM available, then you will probably see that it might not necessarily make that difference, because in this series there will be quite a bit of influence from my own operators' winter operations procedures, which might not necessarily all be the same in other companies. So, let's go ahead then and make the difference. In icing conditions, you have temperatures that are 10 degrees or below, and any of the following exists. Visible moisture, which can be clouds, fog with visibility of 1 statute mile, so 1,600 meters or less, rain, snow, sleet, ice crystals, and so on. Or ice, snow, slush, standing water is present on the ramps, taxiways or runways, and in these conditions engine anti-ice must be selected. Now let's talk about freezing conditions. Freezing conditions exist on the ground when the temperature is plus 3 degrees centigrade or below, and any of the following exists. Visible moisture, which can be clouds, fog with visibility of a statute mile or less, rain, snow, sleet, ice crystals, and so on. Or ice, snow, slush, or standing water is present on the ramps, taxiways, or the runways. The purpose of the concept of freezing conditions is to give clarity and certainty as to when the more complex procedures associated with the Supplementary Procedures Chapter 16 Adverse Weather, Cold Weather Operations in the AFCOM must be carried out. And the Winter Operations Checklist is available for quick access to some of these procedures. Now that checklist will be available on my channel at some point. I can't promise exactly when, as I still have to draw it up at the time of this recording. So, those are the two kinds of procedures that we have available. So, the basic way to distinguish between the two can be icing conditions, temperature between 10 degrees and 3 degrees, freezing conditions, temperature 3 degrees or below. And for both of them, we have to have visible moisture, such as precipitation, available. Alright, so let's now talk about the outside check of your airplane. When we come to the airplane, we need to check that all the surfaces are clear, except as permitted by the airplane's flight manual. So for the 737, that basically permits us, we can have a thin layer of frost on the airplane, as long as we're able to distinguish all the lines and features on the airframe below it. And we are approved to have cold-soaked fuel frost on the wings, which basically is in the area marked in black over here. And that cold-soaked fuel frost can form up by flying through moisture with a wing temperature that is less than 15 degrees, and the fuel being at a certain low temperature. Then frost may form up within the area on the wing marked over here, and you are permitted to depart with frost in that area, provided it is 3 millimeters or less. Now, that is already one of those insights in real-life operations, which unfortunately is not possible to be simulated with a Microsoft Flight Simulator, but that's why I told you we have to simplify things a little bit for Microsoft Flight Simulator operations. Now, in order to determine if anti-icing or de-icing is needed in a Flight Simulator, we basically have to look at the outside conditions. We can see that right now it's snowing, so that is going to be a definite need for de-icing the aircraft before we depart. There is a small little trick that we can use as well, which however on the ground is not always reliable, and that is looking at the FMC actions, and on the payload page we have an icing level over here. However, that mostly works in flight. On the ground, our lovely simulator usually gives us a 0 icing indication, which is unfortunate, but in flight you can use that one to determine if you have icing on your airplane as well, because Microsoft Flight Simulator unfortunately isn't 100% reliable with the visual clues. So, in real life, there are a lot more things to go into when we're talking about the de-icing and anti-icing procedure. In my airline's winter operations guide, the first 21 pages are basically dedicated to understanding the different kinds of precipitation and the different kinds of ice buildups that we can have on the aircraft, and establishing the need to de- or anti-ice the airplane. However, there is a very easy basic principle that we can all abide to, and that is, if in doubt, there is no doubt, de-ice the airplane. So let's talk about de- or anti-icing the airplane. There are 5 steps to a successful de-icing maneuver: the contamination check, the de-anti-icing procedure, the post-treatment check, the pre-takeoff check, and the pre-takeoff contamination check. So let's quickly talk about what all of these actually mean. The contamination check is a visual check of the airplane performed by the captain, engineer or service provider to establish the need for de-icing. For Flight Simulator, it is always going to be the captain who is going to do that check, in other words, you. Then the second step, the de-icing and anti-icing procedure. That is the procedure by which frost, ice, snow and slush is removed from an aircraft to provide uncontaminated surfaces, and where an aircraft is protected from contamination for a limited period of time in case of anti-icing. After that, we have the post-treatment check, which is an external check of the aircraft after a de-anti-icing treatment to ensure that the aircraft is free from any frost, ice, snow or slush that was detected during the contamination check. Following that, we have the pre-takeoff check, and that is an assessment normally made from within the flight deck to validate the applied holdover time, and that is normally carried out at the holding point of the runway. Finally, we have the pre-takeoff contamination check, which is a check of the treated surfaces for contamination, performed when the holdover time has been exceeded or if any doubt exists regarding the continued effectiveness of the applied anti-icing treatment. That check must be completed from outside the airplane. So, let's go ahead then. We talked about the ways to establish if de- or anti-icing is needed already. To summarize those in Flight Simulator, since we have only very limited visibility of actual icing on the airframe, which would of course be the primary way to determine if de- or anti-icing is needed in real life. Since we only have limited ways to do that in Flight Simulator, our basic way to determine if de- or anti-icing is needed is either when we've flown through a lot of icing on our way into an airport and we can still see icing accumulated on the exterior surfaces of the aircraft, which can happen. However, Flight Simulator is not very reliable at actually indicating that. Of course, if we see any of these contaminations, de- or anti-icing procedure is certainly needed. The other way to determine if it's needed in Flight Simulator is simply by looking at the outside conditions. What we can say is, with the temperatures at 0 degrees or below and precipitation, we definitely need to de-ice the aircraft. And in snowy conditions, we will for sure need to do the same. Now, if you want to be 100% realistic, if you have snow and slush on the surfaces and you taxi the airplane in, there is a good chance that you will have some kind of contamination on the aircraft as well, so de-icing might also be needed under these conditions. Again, this is a very simplified procedure for the use in Flight Simulator. So let's go ahead with the actual de- or anti-icing procedure. There are several different SOPs available for them, some in the original Boeing AFCOM that have been provided with the PMDG 737 like 10 years ago in Microsoft Flight Simulator X. Unfortunately, those are no longer available in the Microsoft Flight Simulator version due to limitations with the Boeing agreement. So we'll have to kinda make up our own stuff here, and I'm going to base this one on my company's procedure, but you will understand that I cannot share the exact de-icing procedure of my company or our checklist that we are using for that. Now, the only way to actually request de-icing in Microsoft Flight Simulator, to my knowledge at the moment, is by using GSX. So those of you who are not using GSX may very well skip over this part of the video. Now, we can access the de-icing when we click on the Prepare for Pushback and Departure. This is gonna take a small moment now, thanks to GSX not really being able to pause anything, but it's asking us, do you want to request de-icing treatment? Don't rely on the default choice, because no is definitely the wrong answer in these conditions.
The icing vehicles are coming now.
So we have just requested our de-icing. There are 4 different types of anti-icing fluids that we have available. Now we'll continue talking as soon as this gentleman is passed. Right, that's better. So our anti-icing vehicles are coming over here. We have 4 different types of fluid available. That's fluid type 1, 2, 3 and 4. Let me quickly talk you over the different characteristics of those fluid types. I am in the meantime going to pause the simulator over here so that we can quickly discuss the different fluids before GSX continues with the de-icing process. So, type 1 fluids is of orange color and is a non-thickened fluid which is best suited for de-icing operations. Note, de-icing operations. It may be used for anti-icing, but only provided very limited holdover time. No additional holdover time will be achieved by increasing the concentration of fluids in the fluid-water mixture, and due to its properties, fluid type 1 forms a thin liquid wetting film on surfaces to which it is applied. If longer holdover times are required, use type 2 or 4 fluids. Now, type 2 fluids has a translucent water-like appearance, and it contains a thickening agent which enables the fluid to form a thicker liquid wetting film on surfaces to which it is applied. Generally, this fluid provides a longer holdover time than type 1 fluid in similar conditions, and with this type of fluid, increasing the concentration of the fluid to water mix increases the holdover time provided. Maximum holdover time is achieved by using undiluted fluid. Type 3 fluid then is a thickened fluid that is intended especially for use on airplanes with low rotation speeds, talking in the region of approximately 85 knots here. It is normally not used in Boeing 737 operations, and it has a lower viscosity than Type 2 and 4 fluids and is better suited for regional aircraft with takeoff speeds of less than 85 knots, or for other aircraft with restrictions on thickened fluid, such as the Dash 8 or the ATR 72. Fluid Type 3 is of a yellowish color. Then, finally, our fourth type, which is Type 4 fluid. That one contains a thickening agent which enables the fluid to form a thicker liquid wetting film on surfaces to which it is applied. Generally, this fluid provides a longer holdover time than Type 2 fluid in similar conditions, and with this type of fluid, increasing the concentration of fluid in the fluid-to-water mix increases the holdover time provided. Maximum holdover time is again achieved by using undiluted fluid, and Type 4 fluid is of a green color. So as a summary, Type 1 is used as a de-icing fluid, and Type 2 and 4 are used as anti-icing fluids. Type 3 is not used in our operations on the 737. So, GSX gives us the choice between what we want to use. In real life that is not always the case, so in real life normally the anti-icing provider has already set up the mixture and the type that is going to be used. Note that there are several different anti-icing fluids available, and the providers typically have a certain procedure and a certain fluid only available, so normally in real life it is not the pilot's choice which one they exactly want to use, but in most places it is going to be the service provider determining which fluid we want to use. Before we can start with the de- and anti-icing procedure, we have to carry out some certain steps in order to protect our airplane. When anti-icing fluids enter the airplane's air conditioning system or the APU air inlet, that can be very problematic, causing fumes in the aircraft, leading to unconsciousness in the worst case. And there has been a very famous accident, or rather almost accident, of a Germanwings aircraft in, I believe, 2013 or 2014, I might be wrong on the exact date here, where anti-icing fluid has entered the engines, and in flight one of the pilots became totally unconscious, the other one could barely make an automatic landing back at the departure airport. So that is the dangers associated with de-icing the aircraft. Now, in my airline we are using 3 different checklists that we have available for anti-icing. One of them is the de-anti-icing prior to engine start checklist, then we have a remote de-anti-icing engines shutdown checklist, and finally we have a remote de-anti-icing with the engines running checklist. Now, I'm going to provide you basic summaries of those checklists in the very near future. But until then, since in Flight Simulator we only have the option to de-ice prior to engine start at the gate, we are going to focus on that particular checklist for now. So let's quickly go over some of the basics that we have over here. In the 737, it can be damaging to the APU if we are de-icing the aircraft with the APU running. Therefore, it is recommended that you're using external power whenever it is possible, unless otherwise required. Now, if you have to de-ice the airframe of the aircraft as well, then it might be the case that the air handling provider has to remove the GPU prior to de-icing. In that case, the APU is permitted to be used, but it should be avoided as good as practicable. Let's head over into our aircraft and carry out some of the steps necessary. So, APU off unless needed, flaps up, no lights, APU bleed off, and stabilizer trim set for takeoff. So, for us, that is going to be 4 units on today's takeoff. And that completes the de-anti-icing prior to engine start checklist all the way down to the start of the de-anti-icing procedure. So from here on, the aircraft is now prepared for treatment, and that is the next thing that GSX is going to ask us as well.
Confirmed, aircraft is ready for treatment.
We are ready, We have some precipitation, so we'll go for the longer holdover time. So let's take fluid type 4, and we'll go for 100% concentration.
Begin treatment now and observe fluid type 4, concentration at 100%. I will call you back when ready.
So remember, the fluid should be of a green color. And we can see that GSX is actually spraying green color on our wings here. It is always necessary, even if you have precipitation or contamination only on a single side of the airplane, that both sides of the aircraft are de-iced in the very same way. Keep in mind that even the de-icing fluid does stick to the wing. Not all of it might come off during the rotation, so even when there is no contamination of icing available anymore, then it might still be that the de-icing fluid itself is going to provide some implications on your rotation. Therefore, it is imperative that de-icing and anti-icing fluid is applied on both wings in the same manner. The same, by the way, also goes for the tailplane. So in GSX we can only de-ice the wings of the aircraft. In real life, of course, it is possible to de-ice pretty much everything. The only region where we should not spray any de-icing fluid on is the flight deck windows and the sensors over here. And of course, the engine intakes and the APU air
I'm disconnecting. Good day.
So the GSX de-icing services are disconnecting. Now it is important to actually note the time at which the de-icing procedure was completed, because that time will be needed to determine our holdover guidance. And in order to determine the holdover time, we can use the document from the American FAA, which we have available on screen right now. You can easily find that one by googling for FAA holdover time guidance. And this document is set up from the FAA every single winter season, and it provides us with the basic holdover time guidelines. Now let's provide an example of how we actually look into this. We have holdover time guidelines for the different fluids available over here, and in the real life you would be using the holdover time table that you have for the particular fluid that has been used. So for example, in my company's operation, we are usually using the Clarion SafeWing MP2 or Killfrost ABC K+. Now, since we don't know which fluid exactly GSX is using, we have some generic tables available as well, which we would be using in real life as well if we were unable to establish which fluid has been used exactly. So we just de-iced using a Type 4 fluid, so we can use this one, and we have the generic holdover time table available over here, which is the one that we can see on screen right now. Let's quickly talk about how we determine which holdover time guidance we have available now. So, first of all, we have to determine the outside air temperature and the fluid concentration that has been used. Outside air temperature in our case we can see is -5 degrees centigrade, and we selected a Type 4 fluid at 100% concentration. So in the holdover time table that means we enter over here, temperature between -3 and -8 at a 100% concentration. Next up we have to determine the level of precipitation or the level of the icing in which we are. Now, for that we can see that very light snow would give us a holdover time in the region between 1 hour 45 to 2 hours and 5. Light snow, snow grains or snow pellets give us 55 minutes to 1 hour 45, and moderate snow gives us 1 hour 25 to 1 hour and 55. Now, how do we know how heavy the snow actually is? Well, we can use this, which is a table made up by the FAA that provides us guidance as to the determination of snowfall intensity. Now, it is not a global standard for giving the exact snowfall intensities, so we don't have any such standard available globally. Therefore, what we can get on the HOTAS can be subjective, however we need an objective assessment. And we can get that one with the table of the FAA or the table of the TC, whichever you prefer. Now, personally, let's go for the TC table up here, but the very same thing would apply to the FAA tables. Now, how do we determine now which snowfall intensity we have? Basically, we need the temperature range, and if it's daylight or darkness, and then we need our visibility in statute miles. Now that is of course drawn up by the Americans, so we get lovely numbers in statute miles over here, but the statute mile equals approximately 1,600 meters, so we can determine it from there. Now, our next step would be to have a look at the actual meta in question, to determine the visibility that we have. And that is going to aid us in determining the actual snowfall intensity. Now, in Flight Simulator right now, since it's not snowing in real life, I have simply selected the default weather scenario for snow. So all we can do over here is to go into some of the weather settings that we have up here and have a look at the different information. But if I'm totally honest with you, that is not really a convenient way of determining my weather, so I'll rather go by just looking outside. And we can see the visibility is really not good. We can't even see the runway threshold over here. We can just barely make out where it probably should be. So that's a visibility of less than 500 meters for sure. So the next thing we are gonna do is to have a look into the table once again, and then we can see, okay, visibility, we have daylight, the temperature is below -1, so at how much of a statute mile are we looking here? I said that I would guesstimate the visibility to be approximately 500 meters in this one, so that is between 3/8 to 7/8 of a statute mile, and therefore we have moderate snowfall at the moment. With that we can go back into the FAA holdover time, and we can now determine we have moderate snow, temperature between -3 and -8, so we're looking at a holdover time between 25 to 55 minutes. Now this would be the moment where we would write down that holdover time guidance, and we would use that to determine the pre-takeoff check later on at the runway. Now, that pretty much concludes the anti-icing procedure that we could follow in Flight Simulator. In real life, things would be a little bit more complicated. For example, the post-treatment check is completely omitted by GSX, and we cannot really perform that one in Flight Simulator as well. We could, of course, go outside and have a look if the visual icing contamination on the airplane is still there, but since I'm not 100% sure if GSX is actually able to remove that one, I'm not 100% sure if we can just look outside and have a look at the visual contamination on the airplane. So this is basically the point where we would prepare our aircraft for pushback. So let's head back into the flight deck, start up the APU, and while we're waiting for that, we can go on with our checks. So, having a look into the winter operations checklist once again, we have to wait at least 1 minute after D and anti-icing is completed, and then we can continue with the below checklist. APU as needed, so we are starting that one up now, then APU bleed as needed, and then we can accomplish the before start checklist, and if that has not already been done down to the line, we would do it now. If it's already been completed to the line, we would just continue with the before start checklist below the line. So we're waiting for the service providers now to remove the external equipment as soon as our APU is started, and when that is complete we can then start our pushback. So APU is online, equipment is going, brake is set of course. Now here's a couple of considerations for starting your engines in icing conditions. Now, we're talking about the extremes here, so bear with me for that. However, if the engine has been cold soaked for 1 or more hours at ambient temperatures below -40 degrees, do not start or motor the engines. Maintenance personnel will have to do their appropriate procedures for adverse weather heating of the hydromechanical unit. So that's important. If the temperature is below -40 and the aircraft has been on a prolonged stop, then we have to be very careful there with our engine start. Now, if the engine has been cold soaked for 3 or more hours at ambient temperatures below -40 degrees, do not start or motor the engine. Maintenance personnel need to do appropriate procedures. If the temperature is below -35 degrees, idle the engine for at least 2 minutes before changing thrust lever position. And up to 3.5 minutes may be allowed for oil pressure to reach the minimum operating pressure after the engine start. During that period, the low oil pressure light may remain illuminated, and pressure may go above the normal ranges, and the filter bypass light may illuminate. Operate the engine at idle thrust until the oil pressure returns to the normal range. And finally, display units may require additional warm-up time before displayed engine indications accurately show changing values. The display units may appear less bright than normal. Now, that is again real-life stuff here that I'm not sure is actually simulated in Microsoft Flight Simulator. However, this pretty much completes the preparation, so we can run the normal before start checklist. Packs off. It's been more than a minute since anti-icing has been completed, so APU bleed can go on. Anti-collision light on, parking brake set, transponder on. And that would be our before start checklist below the line completed. So now we can start our pushback. And we do not need another de-icing.
Due to icing conditions, please stand by for engine start until push completed and brake set.
That is interesting. Now, in real life, we do start our engines during the pushback. I don't know why GSX is doing this.
Release parking brakes.
So, the parking brake is now released.
Commencing push. Due to icing conditions, please stand by for engine start until push completed and brake set.
Alright, so this video is really getting long right now, so we'll split this one into a second part over here, and we are going to do the actual taxi out procedure and everything as soon as we do the next video. For this one, it is important to remember the 4th and 5th step of the anti-icing procedure, which is going to be carried out after we have started the engine and taxied to the runway, which is the pre-takeoff check and the pre-takeoff contamination check. Now, the pre-takeoff check, as we said, is normally conducted from within the aircraft, so from inside the flight deck. And basically what we're doing there is to ensure that the applied holdover time guidance is still valid. Now, we said previously that we're looking at a holdover time of approximately 25 minutes. Now, by the time we get to the holding point, we have to be very aware of possible changes. So, for example, the density of the snow might have changed. We might have gotten some strong winds, which could have blown off some of the de-icing fluid from the wing and thereby reduced our holdover time. And finally, it is very important not to taxi into any jet blast from other aircraft, as that can easily blow your de-icing fluids off the wings and thereby invalidating the holdover time. That's going to be it for today's video. We will continue this one in hopefully the very near future. For now, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found this one interesting. And if you did, be sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. And if you really want to support my channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link that you can find in the video description below. Now, if you do want to become a permanent supporter, there is also a Patreon link down there, which you can use to permanently support my channel. For now, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this one interesting. On the next one, we're going to get to the actual taxi and flight procedures, which is probably going to be a little bit less theoretical and a little bit more practical. So stay tuned for that. Until that, I'm looking forward to see you all again very soon.